I'm going to show you how to create this cyberpunk city in Photoshop. Alright, so for this composite, I created this city with about 36 photos altogether. That's including the effects, the subject, the rain, the background, the clouds, the sky, and the city, and everything else in it. So for this edit, I wanted to make sure that I got the perspective correct and accurate. So what I did was I downloaded a perspective grid for free. So for this image, I just used the 1-point perspective grid, and I kind of just put it into place where I wanted the horizon line to be. And I started to paint the composition that I wanted to build. So the grid was right here, and I drew this line for the horizon line. So I had put the grid about right there. And then with these lines, I just took a hard brush and a darker gray color, and I started to paint in the buildings along the lines that they give you. So it's pretty accurate in perspective, and I just kind of drew buildings where I thought they would go, and kind of the composition that I wanted to go for. So I kind of just did that real rough, and I made sure the perspective was correct, and that grid is a huge help. I don't think I would be able to draw that without the grid, personally. So then I continued to kind of just build the composition, and those in the back are the city. Then after that, I just painted a gray layer on top of the buildings, but not on the background where I was going to work. So I would use this gray layer to see the composition a little bit better, and also to start building on top of the buildings as well. So at this point, I started to build the background. I disabled some of the lines so I could see a little bit better. So I put in a sky. So when things are really far away, they get really matted and brighter, and things in the foreground are a little bit darker and a bit more saturated and darker. So in the background, I wanted to make it really kind of bright and matted. So I added a screen layer and just painted. Then I added my buildings, and it's just a cutout of a city. So at this point, I had my composition going, and this layer was below the gray layer where my buildings were, but I made sure to put the lines on top of that gray layer so I could see exactly how I should put the buildings in later on. So I continued to build the background a bit. I was just getting rid of things that were a little bit distracting in the image, and that I just painted with a color that's kind of around the building. I reduced the saturation, and I matted it a lot because things in the background are a little bit more matted usually. And I just painted a layer to get rid of the distracting areas. This is a shot of a full moon with some clouds around it. And I just put that into screen blending mode and reduced the opacity. And it made this really cool cloud effect. And I did that one more time up here. And I put some color in there with screen blending mode. And this one is color dodge. And this is just another screen to put in an area where I thought it needed some more. And that's pretty much it for the background. So I went back to the foreground, put in my perspective lines, and started to build the city. So there's a bunch of photos in this, and what I did was kind of just put photos in there and lined it up with the perspective and started to mask away parts of the image until it looked like it was coming together and everything was going well. So at this point, I started to add buildings. This is the first building that I added. And it's just this shot I got on a stock photography website, and with these you want like kind of night city shots, and this was perfect. So I ended up using this image for both sides. I flipped this and used only parts on each side, so I'll show you real quick. So this is the same image, and it's kind of just skewed into different positions, and I made sure to get it going along the lines that I had created earlier. And I made sure not to have the same things in both sides. So on the right side, I used the signs here, and I used these people. And on the left side, I used this person, and I masked out these signs. And I changed the perspective as well, so it's not the same. So over top the right side, I wanted to make it different because it was a way to it was kind of the same, that you could see the same person. So I wanted to put another one on top of that. So I just kind of put this over top of that, and it made it to where you can't tell that this is the same image. So I just continued to build and color grade accordingly. And this one's matted because it's further back. And I just continued to build the image. So I'm just gonna go from the bottom to top and show you kind of what I did throughout the edit. So I put this up here and I color graded it a little bit. So color balance adjustment layer, and those are the values I used. I changed the darkness, the exposure with the curves adjustment layer, and I also matted it as well because it was further away. I wanted to add this blimp in there, color graded it, reduced the exposure, except for this bottom part. I brushed with a white brush on the bottom to reveal that, and I matted it as well. And then on this layer, it's just a normal layer, and I painted some of the colors around to kind of better match the scene. This is this really cool industrial looking thing that I added. Color grade, I did not color grade that. I did this really weird curves layer that kind of made it match the scene a little bit better. And then I added a hue and saturation adjustment layer and increased the lightness and saturation, and I colorized it to make it a specific color, and then I just painted in right there at the bottom. All right, so I added this picture at the very back, and I made sure to match perspective accordingly, and I masked out all the top area and all the stuff that I didn't want. And I just made sure to like go in here and really make sure to get everything perfectly masked out, and I just kind of painted away and painted back on the masks to make it look like it's actually coming together. Alright, so I changed the hue and saturation on this one. So I added a hue and saturation adjustment layer, and I clipped it to this one. And I changed the value to +12 to kind of match the shadows and the highlights of the other areas. So when you composite, you want to make things as consistent as possible. So when you go in and you do a global color grade, it's not all crazy and hard to do. So you want to do local color grading and change the exposure and everything to make it consistent, and then go in with a global color grade to kind of make it exactly how you envision it in the end. So I changed the hues a little bit with color balance adjustment layer. I made it dark, and then I matted it as well to match the scene. I painted the ground here just because it was distracting and unnecessary for the image. And then I added this foreground, and I used the healing brush tool, and I just Alt or Option and selected and got rid of this line right here that was really distracting to me. And then I went ahead and color graded with a color balance adjustment layer, and I made the foreground really dark because everything in the foreground should be really dark, everything in the background should be a lot lighter. So I went ahead and did that to make it a bit more realistic. I really wanted to add a lot of smoke for this, so I added a smoke layer, and it's just a brush I made out of some clouds. It's really useful. So yeah, here's another part, and it's just going along the perspective as well. And I just continue to add photos and put it in where I think it's appropriate. And I continue to just color grade with hue and saturation and color balance adjustment layers and curves adjustment layers. Here's a copy of that industrial looking image and the color grade as well. This is just a shot of a firework that I put into screen blending mode, and I put it behind the industrial image. and then another smoke picture in screen blending mode. Here's a image of a neon sign in screen blending mode, and more pictures of signs. Screen blending mode layer to kind of give it a bloom effect. More signs. Let's see. Here's a hut that I got. I just cut it out and put it in there. And I made a shadow to make it realistic. And with the shadow, it's just a multiply blending mode layer. And I just painted a dark color that I selected. And I color graded that with color balance and a curves adjustment layer. I added a screen blending mode layer to create a bloom effect on the windows. There's a sign. I just kind of cut it out a little bit and put it into screen blending mode, or this one is in lighten blending mode. Sometimes you have to go between screen and lighten and just kind of try to figure out what's best for your image. I copy and paste by pressing Control or Command J, and I put that one into soft light blending mode to kind of make it see-through, but solid as well, a little bit more solid. And then I duplicated by pressing Control or Command J one more time, and I put this one into screen blending mode. And finally, I added a bloom effect by putting this layer into screen, selecting a light blue color, and just tapping, painting with a really soft brush to create that bloom effect. More bloom with a linear dodge add. I wanted to make the sun kind of bleeding off into this building right here, so I just put this adjustment layer into screen color dodge blending mode and just painted right there with a soft brush. I color graded these more with hue and saturation. I went into the magentas, and these are the values I used to kind of color grade it a little bit further. This is just more interest with a screen. I cut this out. It's just like glitter. I wanted to make this area have a little bit more in it, so I added this this building here, and I masked out the sections that I did not want, and I color graded with color balance adjustment layer, curves adjustment layer, and I matted it with another curves adjustment layer, and I did a color grade on the left side as well. So with all the color grading and exposure adjustments, the image is now looking really consistent, and it's realistic in terms of how it would look in real life, with the background being matted and light and the foreground being more saturated and dark. So now that I had all of that, I went ahead and I copied everything into a new layer by pressing Control or Command Alt or Option plus Shift plus E, and it will put it into a new layer. And then what I did was I took that, I Control or Command T, I right click and flip vertical, and I put it kind of where the horizon meet. And then I put that into soft light. to kind of make it look like the ground is wet and it's reflecting, and it's just kind of the style that I wanted to go for. So this is what I came up with. It's soft light blending mode, and I masked out sections that I didn't want because it was like way up here at the top. So I masked out a bunch of stuff, and I reduced the opacity and put a motion blur on it to make it look like it's more of a reflection, because the usually reflection isn't really sharp. It usually has some kind of blur on it. So this is what I came up with, and I just copy and pasted that one and put this one into color dodge blending mode and masked out a little bit more that I didn't want. And I copy and pasted that one, and I put that one into linear light and did just a few that I really wanted to stand out. This one is just wires that I wanted to be in the image. This is another one, just copy and paste that one, and I matted that one because it's a little bit further in perspective. This is another wire that I use in the foreground, and I matted that one and decreased the exposure as well. So on this person right here, you could see it in the final image, but she didn't have a reflection. So what I did was I desaturated the colors, and then I put this layer into multiply blending mode and reduce the opacity, and I just painted her shadow in there so it's more realistic. I did another smoke layer. This layer is linear dodge add for just more bloom effects. And then I compiled everything with controller command Alt+R Option plus Shift plus E, and I blurred the background because I knew I wanted my subject to be separated from the background. So I used a 20 pixel blur by going filter, blur gallery, filled blur, and go to 20 pixels. So I went ahead and put the subject in there, which is just a picture of me. I was having a lot of difficulties getting the colors correct on this subject specifically. Sometimes you don't have to do all the things that I had to do. But I added a hue and saturation and put it into colorize, and just kind of make it more orange instead of red, because there wasn't a lot of red in the image in the first place. So it looked a little bit funny to me. Then I added a matte a little bit because I was way too dark and it looked a little funny to me. And I added a little bit of light at the bottom right here. I also added a bench, and I did a color grade on it. And I did a hue saturation where I colorized and made it a color I wanted, to kind of make it look like the light is consistent on the bench. And I did the same thing on the left side with blue color. And I matted this one a little bit. So behind the subject, I did a screen blending mode to separate a little bit more, and then another screen blending mode with a different color. I did some sparks, color dodge blending mode, and I just did a few of those behind the subject. Here's another smoke layer. another light because I wanted it to kind of be consistent, because there wasn't really a light source, but there was a lot of light on the subject. So I wanted to kind of make it look like a light source was coming in on the right side. This is just a rain layer. So I got this rain from just a picture when it was raining outside, and I put a motion blur on it going down, and I copy and pasted that one and just put it in different spots. So this umbrella was really distracting to me. It was really saturated, so I wanted to desaturate that really quickly. So I just went into blues and desaturated it all the way, and I just painted with a white brush where I wanted it. So I wanted to add tonal contrast, and I just used black and white adjustment layer for tonal contrast. So this is the difference, and these are the values that I used. This is my global color grade with camera raw filter. So go filter, camera raw, and these are the adjustments that I made. So I matted the whole image and decreased the exposure at the same time with this line here. I made sure to get it looking right with these adjustments. Then after that, I went in here, gave it a vignette, and then I went into here and gave it a orange and teal color grade with these values. Then I went into this tab and changed the hues to make it match better. I changed the saturations a little bit and the luminance as well. For this image, I usually don't do this, but for this one, I thought that it looked good with the global color grade with the split toning tab. So I just gave it kind of a yellow in the highlights and real like a cyan, and I made the balance go towards the shadows. All right, so I wanted to further color grade, so I used a color balance adjustment layer. I went into the shadows, added +6 blue, double click the layer. I separated these two arrows and I made it to where it took that effect out of the highlights, so it's just affecting the shadows. I did another vignette with just a curves adjustment layer, and I masked out the center. I did tonal contrast on just the center area with a black and white adjustment layer. I added a color lookup table by going adjustment layer, color lookup, and I added edgy ember and put that into soft light blending mode and put the opacity to 32. So I increased the reds. So for some reason my monitor makes reds really saturated and bright, but when I export it, it's not it's not that saturated or bright. It's really desaturated, so it's real hard for me sometimes. So what I usually do is I add a selective color adjustment layer and increase the reds, and that's just for me personally, because I know my monitor is kind of tricking me when I see the final image. And I added another selective color adjustment layer and increased the blues. So the opposite of yellow is blue, so I increased the blue on this one. This is just a sharpen, and so what I do is I press Control or Command Alt or Option plus Shift plus E, and I compile everything into a new layer. I right click it, convert to smart object, go filter, other, high pass, and I usually go from anywhere from 2 to 4 on this. So on this image it was 2, and after that I put the layer into overlay blending mode, and I masked out everything I did not want to be sharpened. So I compiled everything again by pressing Control or Command Alt or Option plus Shift plus E, and I right click, convert to smart object, and I put this one into blur gallery and gave it a iris blur. To just blur out the outer sections. I gave it extra vibrance, and I did my final noise layer by pressing Alt or Option plus New Layer, putting that into soft light blending mode, and fill with 50% gray, and filter noise, add noise, 20% on Gaussian, and it gave it a really nice and subtle, consistent look at the very end with that noise layer. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching. If you guys have any art that you want me to see, please tag me on Instagram at jfarmphoto. I hope that you learned something from this and you were able to take away from it a little bit. If you have any questions, please leave me a comment. Please subscribe to my channel. And that's all I have for you guys. Have a good one.
Show you the way out of here. Feel the virgin water. Go drifting away from all of the gray. I only want to show you the way